It turns out that we're even predictable in negotiation. And something that Jeremy told us about the in-group, out-group, and how, recall that he said that we tend to mirror each other's behavior, act like each other, in-group more than out-group. Well, what is litigation is inherently in-group because it's venue-driven, venue and case-type driven. And it turns out that it's a social convention. Negotiation is a social convention that varies by what the in-group is. And these box graphs get into some of the data that we've collected that show how we all know that lawsuit value is determined, number one, by venue. Plaintiffs who keep their venue have much higher returns on their cases than those who are either transferred to another in-state venue or that are removed to federal court and then transferred out of state. Venue is the number one determiner, and it permeates negotiations. We also know that the bar tends to divide by demographic group, by case demographics, claim types. Same people don't often, except in smaller markets, handle personal injury and construction. And so there's segmentation in group by claim type too. What this graph shows you is that where people anchor relative to the end result in a case varies dramatically by venue and by case type. What these box graphs represent is final settlement positions relative to opening demands and opening offers. And in this column, we've got gross recoveries by jurisdiction. So people have segmented by where they are. And you can see, I'm not going to tell you who the biggest BSers are, but you can see that in certain parts of the country that you have to put more horseradish on your opening demand than in other parts of the country. And it's interesting, you got to know what the in-group behavior is. Because if you're the out-group from out of town and go in and try to negotiate with the in-group behavior, you may think, well, gee, I may be from a more reasonable jurisdiction, and we start at 2.5 to 3x what we really want. And think I'll be seen as more reasonable if I'm in a jurisdiction that might suggest that we want 5x, or we're going to shoot the moon a little more and we want 5 or 6 times what we really, or demand 5 or 6 times what we ultimately take. The problem is that concessions, the dollar concessions that you make from each round are gifts, tantamount to gifts. And the same research Jeremy pointed us to on mirroring behavior. Even people who don't like each other feel an obligation to return gifts. If somebody gives you a gift and you don't like them, what do you feel? You think, like, I wish they hadn't done that. But now that they do, I'm going to have to give them the pink elephant gift I got last year and hand it down. People will reciprocate gifts even if they don't, and it ends up being mirroring behavior that shows up not only in the way we sit and lean back and everything else in conversations, but also in negotiating behavior. So the result of it is that if you're used to playing at 2.5 or 3x what you really want, and you're in a jurisdiction that expects an opening demand of about 5 or 6x, they will see you as more reasonable or foolish in the first demand if you start at 2 or 3x. But what happens then? You've constrained yourself on the graph by moving over to here and have to, by definition, make smaller concessions for the rest of the mediation to get to where your endpoint is. They get more irritated by the smaller concessions for the rest of the day than they would have if you'd have shot the moon in the first round. It's all a function of in-group behavior and how people respond with the cognitive tics that we do predictably, depending on in-group, out-group. Same thing by jurisdiction. And this aligns with game theory research that people, remember the prisoner's dilemma, when they run it once, people will defect. If you run it, and it's a game where you have the choice of both of you continue to lie or keep quiet, you get short terms and get out. If somebody defects, that person gets to get a real short term and the other one goes to the slammer for a long time. It's a nice little cute empirical game. What they find, the point for us, is that first-time players will defect. But as you play more and more and repeat play, people will tend to cooperate. And same kind of thing depending on the in-group behavior And I suspect, but can't prove, that people in larger bar associations are more likely to be competitive because they're not likely to run across the same litigants than those that are in, and it doesn't have to be large geographic, it can be within bars. LA in general in the tort bar might be quite competitive because you won't see each other again. But if you drill down into the IP bar or some very narrow segment of the bar, it might have a completely different behavior because they will see each other again. So we know that negotiation is a dance.